So in your opinion, maybe a few words first about to present yourself and maybe the work that you do in relations with the team of this panel, and maybe directly then give us what, in your opinion, are the factors that are essential to supplier diversity success. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, good morning. First of all, let me just say I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Wendy and team. It's always good to partner along ideas where we're very in sync with what needs to happen. My name's Cassandra Dorrington. I work with CAMC, Canadian Aboriginal Minority Supplier Council, called CAMC. Very long name, we shorten it for a reason. And what our whole mandate is to drive economic inclusion. And that's with a particular focus on minorities and Indigenous people. Because what we are realizing that the world we live in is growing, but we get left out around the fringes. So how do we make that happen? What's our mandate around that? So I've been there for 9 years. Seemed like you walk in one day, the next thing you lift up your head, and 9 years later. And we've made some considerable success, but as you can tell, even by the presentations before us, on particular underrepresented groups, there's a lot more road to travel on that. So do you just want the introduction then just for everybody and then or answer the questions at the same time?
Maybe the first question.
Okay. So let me start. Before I answer the question, I just want to make sure everyone understands what is supplier diversity. Because I will use the term supplier diversity and I'll use the term inclusive procurement interchangeably. Because what we are talking about, because years ago when we started this, CAMC started about 15 years ago, and we used the term supplier diversity, and we get a lot of raised eyebrows. What do you mean? We understand what is a supplier. We think we understand diversity. When you put it together, what does that mean? So as we've been going over the years, we realize what we're really talking about is inclusive procurement. We are really focusing on the procurement activities that happen across organizations, whether it be government or corporations, and making sure that supply chain is diversified, that the inclusion is such that it's not just the mainstream players. And when I use the term mainstream, I'm usually talking white organizations, white-owned organizations, are not the only one at the table. That we are now looking at not just those white-owned organizations. Do we have minority-owned organizations? Do we have women-owned? Do we have Indigenous-owned? What do we have at the table? So when we talk inclusive procurement, it's including everybody at the table. So when we started 15 years ago, as I said, it was a long road. We were the only ones on the block, and sort of as other partners came along, we've come together to coalesce. But what's essential to have inclusive procurement be successful as an organization? It really has to be part of their goals. It really has to be built into their business case. What we do is not a nice to do. It's not because, the flavor of the month, or, it's nice puppies and things like that. Next month we'll move to flowers and we'll move to something else. It has to be part of the business. It has to be that they recognize it's tied to their overarching profitability, their overarching goal as an organization. If we link it to the business case, it doesn't get lost when person A leaves the organization. It's still inside. So one, it's tied to their business case. Two, it has to be linked to executive sponsorship. Again, people do what is important at the top. If the CEO and the leadership team are talking about that, it funnels down, someone else is delivering on that. This is not a groundswell at the bottom levels of the organization. Someone says, if we do it, maybe they'll recognize it. It has to come in from leadership sponsorship at the top. And then the other one, and I'll let the other ones, the other thing is, it has to be linked to what we do. Over the years, we've had a lot of organizations come into us and say, supplier diversity is part of our DNA. That sounds so wonderful. And then all of a sudden, someone leaves and you don't hear from them again. Is it really tied into their practices? Do they have a policy statement? How is it linked to their procurement practices? Do they have a database that actually collects the data that says, this is a minority-owned business, this is a woman-owned business? Do they have that data that they can use? Are their procurement people trained in being able to identify? Is it built in their RFP? There's so many things that when they tell me that it's part of our DNA, unless I see all those pieces, it's a nice to hear, and that's where it ends. So I'll pass that along.
Thank you, Cassandra.
Stephanie?
I feel like you've said it all.
No, I know you know enough. Yes.
But great start. So I am Stephanie Fontaine, representing WeConnect International in Canada, and we help women-owned businesses to succeed in the global supply chain. So how we do that is we identify, educate, register, certify that women, the business is women-owned, controlled, and managed by either one or a group of women. So I'm fairly new to the role. Been leading this organization in Canada since September, but I'm not new to this space. I've been doing this since 2013 and have worked closely with Cassandra and Miele and even Patience. So, but my background is actually in corporate, which I think is very interesting because I look at it from a very practical point of view, and I always tell this story when I get to be on panels. One day, I'm just sitting in my office, and my boss came in and said, "We have to do supplier diversity. Do you want to do it?" And I guess I was the woman without children, right? Who, to go with that theme, who had a little bit of extra time to stay at the office. So I was often kind of voluntold to do projects. So I took it on because it seemed interesting. I had no idea where my journey would take me, but it's been absolutely incredible to be part of this. So, while like Cassandra had a really great start about what are the success factors, like tying it to the business case and those things, I have 6 items that I present, and they're really more practical. Like at the practical level, and that's what I use when I go out and build supplier diversity programs for organizations. Because after I left corporate, I went off on my own and helped organizations, corporations, and government to build their programs. And over the years, we've come to know that these 6 high-level practical steps are what ensures success. So policy and C-suite support, so tying it to the business case, that's number 1. Number 2 is developing the implementation of the supplier diversity action plan. Like, it's not just going to do itself. You need to have a plan and you need to track your efforts. So you need to develop that. This, I cannot say how important this is, having a comprehensive internal and external communication plan. That is absolutely a must, like inside the organization. People at the top may get it, but if they don't know how to filter it down, it's just not going to happen. 4, review supply chain and identify opportunities. And that means know what your baseline is, like what are you starting from? And it also means training your buyers. And then when you get further along, developing a plan to train the suppliers and help build their capacities. So these large organizations have a responsibility to help the suppliers, move through the tiers. And then measurement. You have to measure what you're doing. And I'll leave it at that and pass it over to Miele.
Thank you very much. So my name is Paul-Emile McNab, and my role is the Director of Business Development with the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. We're based here in Toronto. Our organization's been around a long time, since 1984, and really our mandate is to drive, build relationships, foster sustainable relationships between Indigenous businesses, communities, and corporate Canada. So today we have about 900 members across Canada, and over 60% of our membership are made up of Indigenous companies, businesses, community economic development corporations that are looking for more business opportunities and are looking to expand their networks. And in turn, really anyone can be a member of CCAB, and corporate members or any individual organization who wants to build more relationships, partnerships, hire more Indigenous businesses in their supply chain, or hire in more Indigenous people within the organization. So my role at the organization is really the connector and connecting the dots. Obviously, we have many different programs and services at CCAB with regard to procurement. Really, our Progressive Aboriginal Relations program has 4 pillars, and one of those pillars is business development and procurement, which essentially helps organizations in terms of their procurement policies build in specific policies in regard to certain targets internally. So no matter what industry you're in, an organization can really look at how they can connect more, and CCAB does that with their Indigenous suppliers. And two, we have a program we launched a couple years ago called Supply Change, which is essentially our Indigenous procurement program with our procurement champions through a two-way directory on Tealbook, our Aboriginal marketplace. So really it's connecting, and what I've really found is I can just echo the statements earlier about understanding the capacity, understanding the supply. I think what I've really noticed, and I've been out there, I have one of the best jobs in the country. I go out, I talk to Indigenous entrepreneurs, talk to them about what their opportunities and challenges are, how can I connect them. Really it's just understanding too the supply chain, understanding the tiers, understanding that what level of contracts they're competing for, and looking at how can CCAB work to influence and help organizations with it, whether it's PAR or supply chain, better their procurement policies. And really it's looking at their suppliers. So typically an Indigenous company, if you're bidding on a contract of $100,000, you're not going to win a contract necessarily at Bruce Power for $100,000, but you're going to look to the Bruce Power suppliers. So it's making that impact in the supply chain, looking at tier 3, 2, 1 companies, and typically that's the spot where Indigenous companies are bidding on projects. So really it's getting the buy-in and getting companies out there, leading corporates across Canada that can influence their suppliers, that can really make a dent down in that supply chain. And that's happening where more organizations, smaller suppliers, then we're connecting to Indigenous companies. And in turn, Indigenous companies are looking at different ways where they can bid on contracts, whether that's through different joint ventures or partnerships. I was just talking to last week an Indigenous tech company who's partnering with another Indigenous company on a large project in Nunavut. So it's just little things like that that can make a difference. And right now, I'll just leave it for that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello. So I work for Aecon. Not everybody knows who Aecon is, but Aecon is in the business of building Canada from coast to coast. So I'll just give you the rest of our little commercial. Currently, we're fixing the Gardiner Expressway, which is falling apart. We are also working on the Darlington nuclear refurbishment. And we work closely with Metrolinx on the Eglinton and Finch West LRT projects. When I joined Aecon, I was working on Eglinton. I was there for 4 years, and currently I'm on the Finch West LRT. Through working with Metrolinx, Metrolinx has really pushed us to consider community benefits, diversity throughout all of our lines of business. So inclusive procurement for us has been happening for a while, but really came to the fore when we kind of inherited this community benefits framework, a document that says that we have to do inclusive procurement, we have to work with small and medium-sized businesses, and particularly we have to work with businesses that are local to our alignment, so folks who were really disrupting as a result of our construction, who happen to be really, really small businesses, mom and pop shops. You kind of know, if you know the city of Toronto, you know the types of businesses that we're referring to. From our perspective, so we're a corporation with about 10,000 staff. So from our perspective, what is needed is a little bit, or what is essential is a little bit different. We definitely need C-suite level buy-in, absolutely. I'm here because the board is in. So if the board is in, the senior management is in, and it just kind of falls down right onto my desk. But for us, when you work on projects, and the way that construction is done right now in Canada is that it's a lot of hard target or like hard deadline projects. There isn't a lot of movement. P3s are all about the private sector taking the risk. What happens then is that inclusive procurement becomes risky because it's changing the way that you do business, right? Anytime you fundamentally change the way that you do business, it becomes risky. So what we need is enough lead time. We need to not need a subcontractor to come in tomorrow, I am usually the one who goes and pushes back on procurement, saying we need 3 to 4 weeks in order to find, in order to look at the availability of the market and find this person, because a Google search, which to be frank, that's typically what happens. Procurement does a Google search and kind of figures out what's happening, or does a Control F on an existing list. If you're not on that list, or if you're not on Google, we don't have time to find you. So it's enough lead time to find those people, particularly in construction, because the availability of that market is very different. So top-level buy-in, enough lead time for opportunities, and accessible processes. This is something that construction is known for. We tend to have RFPs that are 100+ pages. So just to bid on, or just to submit a kind of plan for how you would help us, you need to get a lawyer, you need to get someone working on this for weeks at a time, just to see if you qualify. So we're working to change that, working to maybe, well, in the past, I have been the person who has explained the RFP instead of kind of sending out the 300-page document. And there's different things that we are putting in place. We're not all the way there yet on number 3, but we're putting in place to make sure that we really are fighting for inclusive procurement at Aecon.
Well, thank you very much for this first round of answers, and I'm so glad to see that they are also very different, and you have stated some between sectors and depending on what you're working on. So the next question would be, again, maybe more on the challenges, the main challenges to implementing a strong supplier diversity program. So what, in your opinion or in your experience, have there been, and how can we overcome these challenges? So, Mr. Dorrington.
Okay, so I told you some of the challenges beforehand, okay? Some of the business case things. But we also, you just heard from Aecon, right? One of the issues is, how do we identify these suppliers? We work hard between CCAB and WeConnect, myself. We work hard to find these suppliers, the owned, managed, controlled, to get them in some sort of database. So therefore, there's access to you when you're looking for them, because we know time is short. So for us, how do we get that word out that we're looking for good quality suppliers? And again, much like you heard, not all of them are capable of working at Tier 1 or Tier 2 or Tier 3 level. So we want to be able to get them, those ones who are smaller, we want to help to build capacity so they're ready. Those ones who are ready, we want to get them in the position so when we know the opportunities, we can connect them. Because if you can imagine, if you get the opportunities late, we get them the Friday before the Monday starts. So you're tracking your procurement people downtown. Tell me what you need, tell me what you need. Somehow that never gets to you until such a time, by the time you reach out to us, if we don't already have them in our database and we're out searching, then we've missed the opportunity. So for us, one is trying to find them, trying to get them registered so we know who they are. We are constantly going across the country, constantly using our networks to reach out to these guys. 2 is, we want to know from organizations like yours and others, what are the opportunities? Because we know we have gaps. We know we have a whole bunch of people who do, let's say, logistics. But, you know, we don't have that many people who might be doing AI. We don't have that many people in the renewable space. We want to make sure they're out there. How do we find them? So for us, if we can identify the gaps, we can actually look for more people and help to build some of those. As you've heard, how do we create partnerships so we have those people in those spaces? So that's the type of thing on our side we're working hard to identify, to certify, to get them in, then to find out what the opportunities and make the opportunities known. Because there's enough challenges, and I heard in one of the earlier presentations when they said, oh, we reached out, we couldn't find anybody. We don't want that to be the answer. And so that for us is, if we know and we can actually work on that, because after that, then it becomes part of the, you've heard, the RFPs for most of these organizations tends to be huge. So whether I'm bidding on $100,000, $250,000, or a $10 million job, it looks the same. If I'm a small 3-person organization, we're basically doing work. We're not doing the time to the administration, and I need to carve out time to actually fill out the RFP to actually get considered. So there's all that sort of, you know, where do we have the time to be able to do that? If it's, and we've talked to some of our corporates, if it's a $100,000 job, make the RFP appropriate for that. Do you still need the 100 pages or whatever for that type of job? So some of those are the things that we have to be able to get our suppliers to the table to work with corporates. Some of this, whether it's the bonding is required and or some of the insurances, some of the issues in the RFP can continue to be issues for our suppliers. And so we're working with the corporates to say, you can't just say we've opened the doors and it's a free space and everybody can come in, because we know there's still barriers. So we want to be able to identify those barriers to actually start pulling some of those away, because all three of us have large-scale suppliers as well. So those large-scale ones, we're just providing the opportunity. They're fine to go. But we have a lot more that are mid-range and smaller, and that's really where the growth is coming from, that we have to help get there. And so for us, it's like being able to make sure we've been able to deal with the insurance question. We've been able to deal with the bonding question. We've been able to help them with the RFP appropriately. All that is, for us, is trying to make sure they're ready, they're positioned well for the opportunities.
That's great, and I'm going to touch on something you said, Cassandra, is like, do we need a 100-page RFP for a small opportunity that's worth $100,000? But again, we need the organizations need the time to be able to kind of think that through, right, and change their processes. So that leads into the three things that I think are the main challenges to implementing a supplier diversity program inside corporations or, government. So the lack of resources or unrealistic resources. So if everybody decides everybody's on board to do a supplier diversity program, to take the time to look at those processes and maybe change them, like, that's not going to be done by, like, let's say the example that happened to me, that I'm just doing this as a special project on top of my job, like my regular deliverables. So there needs to be investment in terms of having the support, having the money. And what I've seen that's been really successful is when you assign one person to lead that and kind of be the voice in the organization and always be talking about it. The second one that I see is a failure to start. So I often have corporations who will say, we're just not there yet. We can't even start because we've seen, somebody else on a panel speaking of how far along they are, and we're not even close to being there, so we're just gonna wait. Well, I always say supplier diversity is a journey. Like, you don't have to wait. You can start by doing a small step and then, moving it forward every year. So it's not something that you can buy in a box and then implement, and then you're done. It is truly a journey. And then having unrealistic expectations. So, one example that comes to mind is a corporation that wanted to start a program and then called me and said, okay, well, now we don't know what our baseline is, but in 6 months, we're gonna have 40% of our spend with, you're laughing, right? 40% of our spend, because that seems like a good number. Well, that is so unrealistic, right? So what I would say to overcome that is you need to come to events or go to supplier diversity conferences, talk to the councils and talk to your peers and see, hey, what is realistic? There is a network out there and they can really be a great benefit to you when you're starting out.
Yeah, I would completely agree, and I'll just say, absolutely, one, red tape. I mean, that is absolutely cumbersome to small businesses. It just makes it absolutely impossible, and right off the bat, you're losing out. So I think that's number one. And two, you have the executive leadership buy-in. You're getting that buy-in, but what I see sometimes is just in large corporations, companies, it's just not everyone has bought in. So I think it's still breaking down those barriers within the corporate structure. But like you said, it is a journey and it's going to take time. But really, yeah, I mean, I think looking at supply, looking at the challenges. It is a journey. It is breaking down barriers, and it really is just understanding, like understanding the background, understanding when you talk about Indigenous businesses, Indigenous communities, understanding the history, understanding the challenges. So if you don't have that perspective or understanding, you're not really you're not going to get anywhere. But again, I guess I'll just leave it at that for now and come back to it.
People always laugh when I say this, but the biggest challenge or the biggest kind of barrier to inclusive procurement in corporate Canada is what I call divorce. People need to get divorced from the people who they've always been buying from. For decades, we have been buying from the same people every single time. It's easy, right? When you're putting together your bid for Metrolinx, or you're putting together your bid for the Ministry of Transportation, you know that Ed, I made that up, Ed is gonna give you this much for the concrete. And Sarah, right, inclusive, will give you 10 of the concrete barriers for $50 each. Right? There are things that you just kind of know because you've been working with these people, you've been building with these people for so long, and then here comes patience. Oh, you can't do that anymore. You have to do this diversity. You kind of have to look at the market. You have to get 3 quotes. And then patience, I'm referring to myself in the third person. Patience is saying, okay, you have to make sure that this company has diverse practices themselves so that you're not just buying from people who are, the buck stops there. So it's a matter of divorce, and it's hard, right? You know these people you've been working with for decades, and you don't know this person that looks great on paper because they have this great RFP that they've submitted, but I don't know who this person is, and I'm scared. I'm scared because I'm accountable for this new relationship that Patience walked in here and wants me to build. So I call it divorce because it kind of feels like divorce. Like if you've been working in procurement for all these years and you've always done construction and bought your concrete from these people and, I don't know, got your PPE from these people, to go somewhere else is a scary thing. And you may not be able to relate, but in corporate Canada, this is how it is, right? So that's it's a really, really big problem. But it takes time. Like Paul-Emile said, it takes a second to kind of push people a little bit and get them to think about things differently. And then what kind of is tied to that, and this is going to sound crass, but the entrepreneurs and the smaller businesses need to be good. If you know you shouldn't be coming in at a tier 1 level RFP because you do not have the capacity to be a subcontractor to Aecon, then don't. And be a subcontractor to Aecon's subcontractor. Come in at the lower tier, because that capacity, once we get burned, not only do we maybe not use you again as a subcontractor, let me take myself out of that. They don't want to have that kind of experience again. So when they see another company that kind of is reminiscent of that initial opportunity where they got burned because that company looks really small. That company doesn't have as much insurance as I want them to have. All of these kinds of things, and they're never going to do it again. And they're going to be like, Patience, you got me burned last time. I'm not going to be accountable for taking this kind of a risk. So those are the 2 major challenges for us.
Can I just add to that? Because, I mean, this is a huge dialogue, right? We could go on and on. I mean, we start off saying, as Stephanie said, where do they start? Do they jump in? Because if they don't have a policy or program, they said, what do we do? They see somebody like an FCA or GM or an RBC, they say, they're doing all that. We don't know where to start. So, we have to do they have a policy, or do they even want to start a pilot? We can help them start small with pilots. So the challenge is they have to be risk adverse enough to want to start someplace. The other one, we always get the question, well, how do I know if they're one of the groups? Can we ask that question? So if they don't even know who, they want to have a diversity program, but if they don't know to ask, and then they haven't collected that data any place, how are they going to move to 40%? So there's some part about that having to have some sort of either, whether it's a spreadsheet off to the side, whether it's some sort of a collection tool, they need that to be able to start. I love when you said you got to be good enough to get in, but the problem, one of the issues we always have, and we had it when Toronto 2015 came in, is like, then work with your tier one, work with your large scales and make sure they put it in their RFP. So whether it be the tier one, tier two, tier three, they have to have diversity built in. We know we're not all going to be at that level. But if you get these guys and they have no commitment to do anything else, we don't get in any other level. And then the other thing is, if they say they're going to do it, track it. There's so many of these motherhood statements. Yes, we believe in diversity. We believe in diversity and inclusion. They get the contract. We never get called for anything. Or if we do get called to submit any of our suppliers, they may get looked at, but nothing comes out. And then at the end of the day, well, there just wasn't anybody that was good enough, you know, or we used a few of them. Where did you use them at? How much did you pay? How much money was involved in the contracts? So there's all these things that the generic thing, you can broad-base say, oh, well, we can't do it. But there's ways that we as councils, as associations, can help you to start to dip your toes in the water. So it's not as scary. And what happens is you get one successful thing, and all of a sudden, one spreads to another, spreads to another. And then we get enough that you get a couple success stories that you can share in the corporate office to say, hey, we use these diverse suppliers. That worked out really well. Maybe we should do it on something other. Because like even with City of Toronto, you got to start with one commodity. You got to start where you think you're going to find success, and then you build on that. And that helps all of us if we can do it that way.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I would just say, and for my last point, I mean, you set targets, set realistic targets, and there's many of our members, they track their Indigenous spend, but I'd be surprised a lot of them don't. So I think if you don't have the targets, if you don't have policies, if you don't have that internal structures in place, and if you don't even know what you're spending, then to me that's where really I look at the main challenge. So really it's just working with organizations and setting them up for success. So trying to do our part as an organization to say, here's what works, here's organizations that set realistic targets, that have the policies in place, and they can start tracking their spend.
Okay, well, thank you. So we have had this habit on all the panels to finish with a positive question. So an optimistic one. So again, from your experiences at what you have seen, what are some of the strongest supplier diversity programs? Can you maybe point out to some of the points where they are excelling and we can maybe learn from that?
Our poster child, or at least my poster child, has always been FCA. So Chrysler turned FCA, right? Chrysler's been doing this for a long time. And so what they've done is from the top down, the policies out there, and they've built this program where they actually grow suppliers. One of the things I really love about what they do, to their tier ones and to beyond there, they have goals for each of these guys to be able to, each of these guys and gals and companies, to be able to say, you have to spend X amount with here. Because we know we've done the research in the community, so we know we want you to spend 8% with minorities, we want you to spend 5% with women, we want you to spend with this, because we know there's this range of companies out there. And if you tell me you can't find them, let me introduce you to some of these councils who have some of these companies. So I'm going to put all the resources in front of you to make you successful. And then yearly, we're going to measure what you do. And so therefore, so we've given you some targets, we've given you the goal, we've given you the resources, and then we're going to see how that works out. So year one and year two, we're measuring. So we get to the point where we said, okay, you had a target of this, you're coming in at this. Talk to me about where some of the gaps are. I'm going to use green, yellow, and red as my targets, my things to be able to assess you. So maybe you're coming in at a yellow right now. Let me reintroduce. There's some other resources. Let me give these to you to help you be successful. If I've given these to you, my teams work with you, and you as my tier one supplier have gone down in the amount of diverse spend you're having, not gone up. And when I've given you all the resources, and we've had this conversation, you might end up going to red and no longer being one of the companies I work with. They've been very clear how strong this program is for them and how strong. it's like, if it's important to me, it should be vitally important to you, right? If I spend $1 billion with you and I say part of that $1 billion, I need you to make sure you've included diverse spend in there. And I want to be able to see it, okay? So therefore and I'm going to introduce you to all the people who have the diverse suppliers around, so you let me know, because we want this to work for you. So I've done all this, and then I start to grade you, and you still don't have it. So tell me, where do we go around? So they've worked really hard with their tier ones to help groom their tier ones to bring suppliers along. And so each year, they'll invite us down, and they'll say, here's a couple tier ones who are having some issues. I want to introduce them to you so you can help introduce them. They'll identify where their gaps are and how you can help them identify some suppliers in some areas that they can work in. So they've been really good on communicating what's important, how to do it, and what resources you need to do it. So we've used them to introduce them to some of our Canadian companies as well, so they can use the same thing. We have to be cautious of that because they've been doing it for so long. Some of our Canadian sellers are like, oh my God, where do I start? They're doing all this. So that's why we we chunk it out into smaller pieces as to how you do this. You're not going to get to be there instantly, but what are the lessons we've learned from them that enable you to start your program and grow from your program?
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of great examples out there. So I'm not going to name any corporation in particular, but there are three things that I want to bring up that I see where the strongest supplier diversity programs have three things in common. They've invested in people. One stat that's kind of interesting in the U.S., where supplier diversity has been around for 50 years, there are still 54% of the programs are being run by one full-time staff or like less than one, so it's a fractional job. So I think the ones that start investing in one person, another person, and growing that way are more successful. Investing in infrastructure. And to me, that means like embracing innovation, having the systems in place, and also training the buyers. Like, you can say we're doing supplier diversity, but if no one knows how to go search the database or, how to go through the process, then it's not going to happen. And then the biggest one to me is community. So some of these organizations, they provide scholarships for some of the diverse suppliers to go and learn to build capacity of some sort of their business. So it could be like marketing skills or HR skills or sales. There's mentorship programs, and they fund those. And at the end of the day, it allows suppliers, as Patience said, to get to be able to bid on those tier one contracts when they're ready. Investing in community also means like coming to the events so that you can meet the suppliers, meet the councils that can then help you. Supporting the programs that the certification councils do. So one example that WeConnect does that's really successful is we have the women-owned suppliers in our networks, and we have corporate members that have experts that do that job every day. So it could be financial experts, legal experts, marketing, whatnot. But we partner with the corporations, and they help to fund those programs where we can then train the women-owned businesses to build the capacity of their business. And then they make introductions. So they will, as Cassandra said, they will introduce buyers and sellers or make introductions intercompany in the community. So investing in people, infrastructure, and the community are the success stories from my perspective as to the strongest supplier diversity programs out there.
Thanks. Those great comments. I'll just finish with, at CCAB, we have many different, we have a certified Aboriginal business program that certifies companies at 51% First Nation, Inuit, Métis. We connect them to various opportunities. We have a PAR program that helps companies in terms of their procurement and business development. But really my role and a big part of it is trust and relationship building. So that's essential to my role, and really just just building trust with our certified Aboriginal businesses, entrepreneurs, economic development corporations, going out across all the communities, and just talking about what the opportunities are, and building trust with corporate organizations. I liaison with organizations like Suncor, CN, to help them find the supply as well. So really, I would just finish with what is essential to my role is really just trust and building business relationships and partnerships.
As a corporation, I'm not going to name another corporation that's doing better than us. However, I will name different tools and tactics that I've seen other organizations, other large organizations do that I think are really helpful, just knowing how to kind of navigate from within a large organization. So the Pan Am Games, although it wasn't a totally successful, or I think maybe that's, I don't know what the panel would say about the success of the program.
Started where we are.
There you go. Okay, I worked for the Pan Am Games, so yeah, I wouldn't have said that had she said it was a failure. But I worked for the Pan Am Games for 2.5 years, and while I was there, I learned about how they were reviewing packages to ensure there was a diverse kind of component. So the point system that they used did kind of track for things that we as an organization said we wanted to do. So if they were a racialized person, or if they were an Indigenous person, if they were a woman, there was a certain amount of points that would go towards that. I think that's a helpful system when you're sitting at a table with buyers and you're going through RFPs. That kind of helps you to weigh that commitment in a quantifiable way. Another thing that I think is very important, interesting, is just for people to be able to access the packages. Not everybody uses Mercs, and to use Mercs and for everybody to be able to find the package and kind of talk about it is important, because particularly at tier 1, you have a lot of like consortia, right? Consortia coming together to bid on your one package, right? Especially if your package is a couple $1 million, you want multiple people to be able to find it so that they can call a friend and be like, hey, go on Mercs, look at package blah, blah, blah. I want us to come together and bid on this. Can you review it with your team? Rather than you have to go into this secure system, type in your password. Maybe you can download it, maybe you can't download it from the system, and it's hard to share that kind of package. I think City of Toronto uses Mercs. I would be surprised if City of Toronto doesn't use Mercs. And another thing, I think it's just really important to have somebody who is a little bit more grassroots on procurement teams. Typically, people are kind of high-level buyers, don't really want to do the community thing. That means you have to sit down and break down the contract. It means you probably have to take a couple extra phone calls to really explain what the expectations are. And it means that you have a commitment to feedback. That's one thing I will say we have. It's a commitment to feedback. If your proposal was unsuccessful, we will explain to you why it was unsuccessful, and we won't just say it wasn't good enough, especially because we want to build that relationship and we're trying to do better.